friends, Sabrina here from Scrappy Tales Crafts, and today I'm going to be showing you a design team project for Trinity Stamps. I'm going to be using some new stamp sets from their June release. This one is called Let's Celebrate. I will also use shark bait here, and I'm going to use the coordinating dies from both stamp sets, and I just wanted to show you the coordinating die set for shark bait. If you purchase it, you're going to notice that there's two submarines. One of those submarines is to cut out the submarine from the stamp set, and then the other one is for you to build a die cut submarine with windows and like the propeller behind the submarine. So I thought that was kind of cool, and I wanted to point it out in case you didn't know. But here you can see I stamped out some images from both of the stamp sets onto Bristol cardstock. I stamped them with VersaFine Onyx Black ink, and I clear heat embossed them. I like to clear heat emboss my stamped images when I'm working with my Zig Clean Color Real Brush watercolor markers, because the embossing helps to keep the color inside the stamped lines. So here I'm very quickly showing you how I colored each image. You can see I stamped some of the images more than once, and that is because I was going to create 4 cards this day, and I knew what they were going to look like, so I knew exactly how many of each image I had to stamp and color for my cards. For this little fish, you can see I colored them in rainbow colors. 2 of them I wanted to look like Dory from Finding Nemo, so I used some blue and yellow markers for that. And right now I'm coloring a purple and green fish, and whenever I color with my zigs, I always start with my darkest marker and I map out my shadow areas. And for most of the images that I'm coloring today, I'm using a center highlight, so I'm focusing the darker color around the edges of each object, and then I would go over the darker shadow areas with my mid-tone and just pull the darker color in towards the center a little bit more, and then I leave quite a bit of white space to create my highlight just with my water brush. I take my brush, I start from the edges and pull that pigment towards the center white area, and that naturally just creates a nice highlight. So whenever I work with my zigs, I only use my dark and my mid-tone color. I don't typically use a third unless I have a larger image that I'm working with, but these are all quite small, so I'm just going to use 2. You can see I already did quite a bit of coloring. I left just enough images to show you how I color each one. I, in particular, really loved how this shark turned out. I used a blue-gray as my darkest color, and then I used a light blue as my mid-tone. And then here you can see what I mean with the white space. I leave a lot more than I typically would for a highlight. With my Copics, I would make my darker color and my lightest color the lesser amount. I'd always have more of my mid-tone showing through, but for some reason I really like the look of a bright highlight with my zigs, so I always do leave quite a bit of white space. It's usually about half the space on the image that I'm coloring. For this little guy snorkeling, I started by coloring his skin, and then you can see I went over his goggles with a light blue color, and that's just because I wanted to tint the goggles, make them look kind of like glass or foggy. So I really liked that effect. For his hair, I'm going to create his hair the way I would with my Copics, with a flicking motion, starting with my darkest marker here. I'm flicking from the top and the bottom. Then I'll go over it with a slightly lighter color, and then again I left quite a bit of white space in the center of his hair to just blend out with my water brush. And I didn't blend it a whole lot so that you can still see those flicking strokes, and I think that helps to make it look more like hair. So now I'm going to color in this cute little crab, and I wanted its shell to look like a conch shell, and they're typically sort of like a pinky peach color. So you can see for the darker color I chose a pink, and then for the lighter I chose a peach sort of skin tone color, and then I'm just going to blend them together with my water brush, and then I'll color in the crab. So I'm going to add the darker marker around the edges of the image, Again, I want there to be a center highlight. For its little legs, I'm going to alternate the two reds that I use just to add, I guess, some interest. I'm not going to do any blending there since it's so small. Now I'm taking my lighter red, I'm going to fill in the rest of the legs and then the center of its claws and its face. I'm also going to outline its little eyeballs. And then you can see for the center, the claws, and the face, I'm just using my water brush. I am going first around the darker area and pulling that pigment in towards the center. For the mouth, you can see I added some pink for its tongue, and then I made the inside of the mouth black. Now I'm coloring up the submarine. Again, I just used 2 shades of yellow. I add the darker color around the edges, and then I pull the pigment towards the center with my water brush. And I believe both of these stamp sets were illustrated by Davina. She is on the Trinity design team as well. And I think my favorite image from both of the sets is this little submarine. And you can put a little girl in the window or a boy, so you can see I did both of them. And then off camera I die cut everything. And you can see I have quite a bit of die cuts. I am only going to be creating 2 cards today, but I will have 2 more on a later video. So for my first card, I'm going to take my Chip Sapphire Distress Oxide ink and ink blend onto this slimline stitch rectangle panel that I cut from white cardstock. And this stitch panel is a die cut from Trinity Stamps. All of the products I used will be listed down below. I'm going over the Chip Sapphire now with Mermaid Lagoon, and then at the top I'm going to use, I believe this is Broken China, but it could be Peacock Feathers. You can see this ink blend is not very blended well, so I will go over with each color again, going from top to bottom this time. I'm going back and forth between the 3 shades of blue, and it does take quite a bit of time until I'm happy with the blend, but I'm going to help it blend a little bit more by adding a lot of water. This is more than I typically would, and I was a little bit nervous that I overdid it. But I'm going to keep it because I will die cut from this, and I didn't think it would be a huge deal. So what I'm doing now is I'm taking this Celebration Borders die. This is one of the dies that you can use to create a cake on your slimline, but I thought it would be really cool to use it sort of as like a wavy background for this blended panel. And it is a slimline die, so it's going to cut all the way across your slimline panel. I made sure that my stitch rectangle was slightly larger than this Celebration Borders die set because I did not want this die to cut across the whole panel. I wanted it to stay as one piece. So you can see I'm going to take that same die and just die cut it all the way down. I think I cut 3 rows of this die here, and I'm going to keep those pieces that I'm cutting out of this panel, and I'm going to use them on my next card. But I thought this was such a cool effect, and I'm actually going to create a shaker behind all of these waves, and I just thought this was really cool and a different way of using those Celebration Border dies. So I'm going to cut 1 more here. I didn't bother to cut another because I knew I was going to be adding a sand bake below there. And I'm not sure if you noticed, but I did have some tape at the end of my border die here, and it was peeling off some of the ink underneath it. So a few times I had to reapply that ink with my blender brush just to make sure everything stayed that blue. And now I'm attaching my sand bake to the bottom of this panel with some art glitter glue. And I'll just flip that panel over and trim off the excess. I created this sandhill with a Trinity Stamp border die, and then with antique linen and walnut stained Distress Oxide ink. I lost the footage on how I did this, but I did create the sandhill the exact same way I did on the background. And then once that was adhered, I took some of my die cut images and I tucked them in between the waves, and I really love how this turned out. I love that you can tuck some of the fins and the submarine into the waves. I just think that overall the background looks super interesting, and you wouldn't even really have to make this into a shaker, but of course I had to add acetate to this card. It's been a while since I pulled out my acetate, and so I think adding the sequins behind added a really cool shiny element to this card. Again, I really don't think it's necessary, but this is definitely one of my most favorite slimline cards I've made in a while. I love all the bright colors on the stamped images. The ink blending turned out nice. The waves in the background are perfectly straight. It's like the way I envisioned it in my head was exactly how I was able to put it onto a card. And I know a lot of you can relate that sometimes something in your head just doesn't work out, and I was a little bit worried that this particular design would be too chaotic or like just too much going on, but I'm super happy with how it turned out. So I'm going to go ahead and start gluing some elements down now. I'm going to start with gluing the seaweed and the coral and this little crab onto the sand. And I'm attaching everything with my art glitter glue. This is by far my favorite glue to use when I'm card making. I did add the sentiment "Sub 1 is missing you" to the bottom left corner, and that sentiment is from the Shark Bait stamp set. If you buy the coordinating dies on any Trinity stamp set, they will also cut out the sentiments, but I decided to leave it as a rectangle because I felt like it stood out a little bit more. And I did color the word "sub" with my green markers. I'm now going to add this panel on top of some white scrap cardstock, and that is because I'm going to be adding glue behind these die cuts, and some of that glue is going to seep underneath those waves, and I didn't want the glue to get on my glass mat, so instead it's going to get onto this scrap piece of paper. You're going to see I'm going to also be careful on how I add the glue, just because I don't want this to stick onto that paper. So I am trying to be careful. And once everything is adhered, I'm going to flip this panel around and add some acetate behind those waves. So I'm going to remove that panel from the white sheet of paper and then add a whole bunch of glue behind this panel. And that will also ensure that all of the die cuts are stuck onto the acetate. So I adhered it on the wrong side of my acetate. I needed it to glue onto the long side since the other way was not long enough for the slim line. So that was okay, I just reattached it here. And then I'll trim off the rest. And off camera I'm going to add 2 layers of foam tape behind this panel, and I figured I would do that off camera just because it was a bit of a hassle trying to cut the pieces on the sides to very, very skinny strips. But I managed to do it, and for the shaker bits I decided to use these really cheap sequins. I bought them a few years ago at a scrapbook expo. If I can find them, I'll link them, but I think it cost me like 99 cents for a whole bunch of blue sequins. You can see here that I'm adding a lot of sequins. I wanted this to be nice and full. I'm also going to add some clear Trinity Stamp sequins in there, but for the most part it's these really inexpensive sequins. So now I'm going to remove the backing on my foam tape and just attach that panel right on top. And I will show you that shaker slowed down after I attach this panel onto my card base. So I'm going to attach it with my ATG tape. By the way, this card base is 9 by 3.5 inches. So here is the completed card. I love that at first glance it doesn't really look like a shaker card, but you can definitely see that there's movement going on, and I just think it's such a neat effect. I love how that card turned out. And for my second card, I wanted to use those little squiggly waves that I die cut from the first card, so I'm going to lay them out onto an A2 panel. I believe this is cut to 4 by 5.25 inches. I'm going to use these 3 die cut images I'm just going to glue them onto my waves. Now initially I thought I was just going to have these 5 waves, but I'm going to trim them and add 5 more. So I'm using the other half that I trim off. So I really like that with the Celebration border dies, you can create A2 cards very quickly because you can use both halves of the border. So I'm going to have some of the waves overlap the images. Here you can see I have one wave overlapping his little swim shorts. And then I'm going to glue Dory down there at the bottom. And one thing I wish I did after I made these cards was add googly eyes to the fish and to the shark. I think that would be so stinking cute. And I definitely have to do that with my next card. Alright, so here's where I'm deciding, do I want to add some more squiggles or is this good enough? So I think at this moment it's good enough. So I'm going to adhere it. And I did try my best to evenly space the waves. It obviously isn't perfect, but I think it looks pretty good here. I'm just going to attach these last 2 waves. And then I'll flip this panel around and trim off the rest. And now I'm going to work on the sentiment for this card, and included in the Shark Bait coordinating die set is these letters that spell out the word or the sentiment, "Hey chum," which is adorable. So I die cut that sentiment 3 times from black cardstock, and I'm going to layer each teeny tiny individual letter 3 times to add some dimension. Now this was totally unnecessary, and by the time I was finished I thought that was totally not worth it, but I'm glad I did it because this was the only dimensional element on the card, and I think that layering it up definitely helped it to stand out more just because it is such a tiny sentiment. I also decided to glue the letters crooked, like kind of wonky, again just to add some interest, and I thought that looked really cute. And I will add to this "Hey chum" sentiment with another sentiment that I'm going to stamp onto a black banner. But before I do that, I'm going to glue down some more waves in between the ones that are already glued onto this panel. I just felt like there was too much white space, so I am adhering those extra pieces that I cut off earlier. And now that I'm rewatching the video, I am noticing that I forgot to add the wave to the left side of the fish, and oh boy, that is driving me nuts. But I already threw away all the extra little pieces I had left, so that's just how it's gonna end up staying, which I'm fine with. Some things you just get in the zone and you don't really pay attention to those details until you rewatch the video that you filmed. Or maybe you re-look at the card a few days later and you notice it. It's really strange. This happens to me a lot. This is not like a one-time thing. This has happened to me multiple times. But, like I said earlier, I'm going to add on to the "Hey chum" with this white heat emboss sentiment that I am embossing onto a black die cut banner, also by Trinity Stamps. And I believe this sentiment says, "Hope to see you soon." And "see" is spelled S-E-A, so that's really cute. And I'm going to adhere that banner to the bottom right corner. And then I believe that will finish this card. I think I might add some gems to it. I do know that I'm going to mat this on black cardstock. I made these cards like 10 days ago, so I'm a little iffy on what I did on them, but I know me and I know I'm going to add a black mat to this panel here. So I believe this is cut to an A2 size card base, so this will cover the card completely. And yes, I am going to add some silver clear sequins by Trinity. these are a new sequin pack or mix, and I will have it linked down below. I don't remember the name of them, but I'm just going to use the silver ones from that pack. And they kind of look like bubbles. I thought they were really cute. So once those are adhered, that will complete my second card. I hope I was able to give you guys some inspiration using Let's Celebrate and Shark Bait. Those two stamp sets are so cute together, and if you haven't yet already, please subscribe to my channel. If you're watching over at the Trinity channel, I will have my personal YouTube channel linked down below, and you can check out some of my other videos. So thanks again for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!